Hard Time, written by Steve Gerber and Mary Skrenes, and illustrated by Brian Hurtt, was a 19-issue series published by DC under the short-lived Focus imprint. DC Focus, or simply Focus, may have been one of the briefest imprints in DC history. It published exactly 4 different titles: Hard Time, Kinetic, Fraction, and Touch. The premise of the imprint was to be about people with superpowers who didn't wear costumes and fight crime. So it was a little like Marvel's New Universe, but with even less success. Focus was skewed towards a young adult audience, as the main characters were all young adults. Oddly, all the comics had a consistent, muted color scheme, which was an interesting choice. Another style choice was upper and lowercase lettering, instead of all caps. Not to mention, all the covers had a very unique, standard design. It was reminiscent of the branding Vertigo enforced for their covers. Additionally, every cover for every title was done by the same art team, Tomer Hanuka and Ryan Hughes. So it was rather clear that DC hoped their design consistency would translate into consistent interest and sales. Instead, Focus began and ended in 2004. The longest-running title was Hard Time, which would run for 12 issues. It was then transferred to the main DC lineup for another 7 very concise issues. A quick note: while Gerber is the only credited writer for the first 12 issues, they were actually co-written with Mary Skrenes. On his archive blog, Gerber states some undefined contractual reason for the lack of credit. Hard Time opens on a scene that, unfortunately, has become too familiar. 2 bullied, disgruntled teens have taken up firearms, gone to school, and held their tormentors captive. The one teen, Brandon, is out for revenge. The other, our main character Ethan, believes this is a prank intended to humiliate those that have bullied them. He's also under the belief their weapons contain blanks. But then Brandon starts to shoot those he dislikes, and Ethan quickly realizes the situation has turned very, very bad. Suddenly, an invisible energy erupts from Ethan, unaliving his friend and ending the siege. The police quickly descend. Here's where Gerber makes the morality of the situation very gray. Certainly, Ethan bears some responsibility for his participation, but he never intended to actually hurt anyone. This is proven by the fact that his gun was never fired and he stopped Brandon from harming others. Yet legally, he's culpable for the actions of his friend. Not to mention, violence of this nature causes a wave of social outrage, and someone must be held accountable. As the only surviving perpetrator, Ethan is the avatar of all that hate and grief. At the same time, Ethan did kill his psychotic friend Brandon, even if he did it unknowingly and unintentionally. So under different circumstances, Ethan might be seen as a hero, but because he enabled a psychopath, Ethan is just as terrible as his friend. At the same time, he isn't. Again, it's a moral gray area where one can argue whether Ethan is a victim and hero, or whether he's just as responsible as the person he originally assisted, or whether he's something in between. At the trial, the judge gives Ethan a tough, ironic sentence. The severity of the crime demands an equally severe punishment. However, the judge cannot give Ethan the death sentence due to him being 15. Also, the judge doesn't want to give Ethan a strict life sentence and remove any hope the young man might have to experience freedom. Instead, the judge gives Ethan 50 years, which is in effect a life sentence. It has to be noted, Ethan would be 65 when released, which is the average age of retirement. So yeah, a subtle reminder that we are all sentenced to hard time for the majority of our lives. From there, Ethan is transferred to an unnamed penitentiary to serve his sentence. We are introduced to an extensive cast of characters, all of whom will have their own story arcs as the series progresses. This includes inmates and prison officials, most of whom will interact with Ethan at some point, although some only affect Ethan indirectly. At any given time, there are about a dozen characters in play. Naturally, the main focus is on Ethan and his experience with prison life. And there is the mysterious spiritual force that gets unleashed whenever he is under extreme duress. At first, his spirit is unformed and wild. However, over time, Ethan manages to give it some shape, learn to control it, and understand its nature. This understanding requires the advice of Fruitcake Mullins, a bizarre prisoner who believes he channels the presence of an ancient Sumerian warrior. This type of explainy character is somewhat typical for Gerber. In his work, there are many examples of wise older characters that appear crazy, but understand what's going on. Basically, they're present to help the protagonist and the audience understand what's going on, even though they talk obliquely and seem reality challenged. For the record, the origin of Ethan's power gets a full explanation in issue 12, as the series concludes its first season. The plot of the first year is so dense, it's difficult to summarize. There are a lot of moving parts, all of which have some purpose to the overall narrative. The amount of story threads that are introduced and resolved in just the first 6 issues alone is somewhat astounding. Furthermore, none of these separate stories and subplots and character beats feel forced or unfinished, nor are they hard to follow. Perhaps the only criticism one might have is Ethan's characterization. In prison, he seems a bit too smart-mouthed and cynical. But Ethan's backstory and his evolution is fully revealed in the first issue of the second season, so that provides the missing context. Until that point, it's hard not to think, maybe he should just shut up and not try to diffuse the situation with poorly timed humor. One of the most heartbreaking aspects about Hard Time is the final issue. It takes place 49 years after the prior issue, and we see Ethan is now up for parole. So we discover right away that he had to serve his entire sentence from beginning to end. For the entire issue, Ethan is hooked up to a Clockwork Orange-style piece of machinery that monitors his truthfulness, remorse, emotional stability, and sexual deviancy. It's all very intrusive and intimate. Ethan is then judged once again by the parole board, who have access to his autonomic responses. He cannot hide. He has to be truthful and reveal himself fully, or parole may be denied. The remainder of the issue is brief summaries of what might have been had the series continued for a number of years. It's an issue packed with the future potential of Hard Time. Much like the protagonist, that potential future and what may have been accomplished was cut short. It is unquestionably a definite conclusion. There are no dangling threads or missed potential. The series is completely wrapped up, although the final scene does have room for interpretation. But it's pretty clear it's hopeful and as happy as it can be, considering the circumstances. And it's pretty easy to determine who picks up Ethan at the end. So like the entire series, it's effective without being blunt and obvious. All that's left to say is, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, comment, and all that good stuff. Additional thanks to all those that directly support this channel and help keep the lights on. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you.